Sanbanan Dumlang, hello, it's Simply Spissa here, and welcome back to another episode of the podcast, Simply Do the Work. And firstly, I just want to thank y'all for consistently listening and supporting me even in 2021. Despite the fact that I have not been updating the podcast regularly, I was really surprised when I was checking the stats. It said, whoa, people are still consistently listening, and so thank you from the bottom of my heart. It really means a lot to me. And so that being said, just get the formalities out of the way. If you enjoyed this podcast and you're not yet subscribed or you're not following the podcast, please do so, and also share it with your friends. Share your favorite episodes. You don't even have to tell them to listen to every episode. Just share your favorite episodes and let's have conversations and do the work. And so today's podcast episode kind of is a follow-up, if you will, to a podcast I did I think 2 or 3 episodes ago, called Queering the Bible, where one of the segments in that episode was talking about the Queering the Bible challenge I did on my Instagram. And so that challenge was hosted by queertheology.com, which, by the way, if you are an LGBTQ plus Christian or you are an ally or cisgender supporter, I do recommend you check out queertheology.com. They have some fantastic resources, articles, PDF guides, and a podcast, which, this is not sponsored, by the way, but it's a resource I highly recommend you guys check out. But yeah, so I did that Instagram challenge, and that was a precursor to the Queering the Bible course that I've been doing actually for a couple of weeks. And so today's episode, basically, I just want to share with you guys the work that I've sort of been doing on that course, because it's really been enriching my life, and I'm hoping you, the listener, will also learn from it. And that being said, a quick disclaimer: this is not a sermon. I'm not trying to preach to you guys. My intention is not to convert anyone to Christianity. And so I do recognize that, especially amongst the LGBTQ plus community, religion can be such a divisive topic, not only like in the circle, but especially because of just the trauma that a lot of queer people have experienced at the hands of the church, or because of religious people in their lives. But I just want to say that this is a safe space, and I'm not about that life. Essentially, I'll be talking about my journey of how I have been able. I'm sorry about the barking. We have a dog. Dogs bark. We move. But as I was saying, today's episode will be really talking about just my journey and how I've been able to reconcile my Christian faith and my queerness. And so, yeah, I think that introduction was fair enough. Let's dive right into it. And so for this course, we'll basically give it like an overview of what Queering the Bible means, and it's basically essentially it isn't, right? We're not we're not doing like revisionist work, right? Trying to change the original meaning of scripture or trying to disregard the context of all of that. Instead, we're looking at how these stories within the Bible, how they speak to us as queer people. Because at the end of the day, all people are telling I'm sorry, I got distracted by the dog. He just ran past my window here. But we're all talking about, when people talk about the Bible, they talk about from their context, right? Whether that context is a white evangelical context, or even also like black churches, the way we interpret scripture is quite different from certain white spaces. And so this is a queer perspective, a queer take on the scripture. And so the passage that I was working with for this course was Ezekiel chapter 37, which, for those of you who don't know, it basically talks about a vision that the prophet had, where God takes him into a valley of dry bones and basically speaks life into these bones. He says that these bones basically come back to life. And so yeah, it's a passage about these bones coming back to life, and it's also the situation around the time the Israelites were in exile and they were crying out to God. But for now, let me start by getting into my story and what this passage means to me and how it connects to my queer experience. So, my best friend saved my life by giving me hope, and through our friendship, I've grown to a point that I feel called to make a difference for others, especially marginalized individuals who might be black and queer like me. So I grew up heavily involved in Christianity and the church, and I felt like I truly belonged in the church. until I started confronting my sexuality and gender, because it's like the more I connected with my queerness, that's made me feel more disconnected from the church and like my faith personally. And so it was around 2018 when I met Chris, and we were both first years, and we were living our best lives during that time, okay? And while we were living our best lives and discovering, just discovering our sexualities and gender a lot more, exploring that side of ourselves, I was also struggling to find the church until I was invited to Hillsong, which felt like home. And if you know me, or even if you were subscribed to my YouTube channel like 2 years ago, you'll remember that I was like an avid and I was a active, yes, that's what I'm looking for, active member of Hillsong. And there I felt I found a community. I even remember once inviting Chris to come to church with me, and they said no. And I was like, okay, cool, it's whatever. Like, I didn't pressure them, I didn't make it a big deal. We moved, right? And so it was after a year in that church, I think, I started deconstructing my faith, because it's kind of like I got to a point where I realized that my issues with Christianity weren't just the homophobia and the queerphobia, but I realized that there were just other elements of the Christian faith. And so I felt disconnected from the faith and the church again because of all the questions that I had. And while I initially felt welcome and free to be myself, I quickly found myself compartmentalizing my faith and my queerness. Like, at church, I didn't speak about being queer, but outside of church, I also didn't feel like talking about religion because of how divisive these things can be. And it's like the more active I became in church, the more I felt like I had to hide parts of myself. And for this reason, I felt like my faith was dying. And on top of that, just a lot was happening in my life. And the church, which used to be a source of life for me, was no longer edifying like it used to be. But my friendship with Chris has always felt sacred and divine. And I also just want to send a special shout out to all my other friends that I've made during these past 2 to 3 years, because they've also carried me and they've really enriched my life a lot. But the thing with Chris, right? Chris is one of the few people that I feel like I can truly be myself with. Like, I don't have to compartmentalize. I don't have to overthink or second guess myself. And I remember there was one Friday night before we were going to go out, live our best lives, do our studenting things. We were talking about just our favorite music, and I remember bringing up the Christian singer Lauren Daigle, whom I was obsessed with at the time. Now, I was a fan of Lauren for well over a year before we had that conversation, but her latest album at that time was Look Up Child, and that album was a crossover success, charting on Christian and mainstream charts. At the time, Lauren was facing heavy backlash from Christians because she performed on The Ellen Show, which we know is hosted by an openly gay woman. And what struck me was Lauren's response to the backlash, because she said that Christians should love everyone and show Christ to all people. Basically, we shouldn't be drawing lines in the sand and saying who's in and who's out, all that type of stuff, which that's just me paraphrasing. And even though Chris is not religious, they inspired me to consider that I might actually have an important role to play within Christianity and even for the LGBTQ community because of this conversation we were having. And I didn't fully believe it back then, but a seed was sown in me that maybe there was a place for me in Christianity, and it just won't be the same as the Christianity that I knew, the Christianity that I grew up with. And one might even say that they unknowingly prophesied life for my spirit at that time. And so the first part of Ezekiel chapter 37 talks about bones coming to life. The Israelites cried out to God in exile and how their hope perished. This is how I felt. My bones were dried from the shame imposed on me for being queer, and I felt a sort of exile from the church. My bones came to life through the friendship I share with Chris. Coming out of exile is related to this, but it's a separate journey that I'm still on, and I hope to share with you guys in the near future. Now, the second part of Ezekiel 37 from verse 15 talks about a divided kingdom being united. And I used to sort of feel that way. I used to feel like I was living in this divided kingdom because I used to feel like I had to distance myself from the secular world while I was still part of the evangelical church. And while I'm still a Christian, my faith looks very different now from it did a couple of years ago. And I no longer see the need to separate myself from others. And I also no longer actively try to compartmentalize my faith and my queerness. And so Chris and I, we have many shared interests, but our queerness and shared experiences really brought us together. And it's like we've literally been walking this journey of healing from lifeless bones, and now we're more whole than we were when we first met. And even our circle of friends is ever growing, and even working together to unite the LGBTQ community and allies on campus. We're trying to get like a young group started there on campus, and my hope is that we all find our people, and we're also able to be a source of life to others in the same way that Chris has been a source of life to me. I want to be that for others, and I hope that those feeling exiled will find themselves a home. And so that is it for today's episode. If you are interested in reading the passage, it was Ezekiel chapter 37. You can, if you don't have a Bible, I'm sure you just Google it, it'll come up. I was working from the Common English Bible. That's the translation that I was using, because it is the translation that we were using for the course, Queering the Bible. And so, yeah, that is it for today. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please do share it with your friends. And also feel free to reach out to me on social media at Simply Spissa, or on Instagram is where I'm most active if you want to discuss this. And I'll see you guys in the next one. I love you so much. Bye, guys.